Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. But just starting off with just general introductions. My name is Gerardo Ceballos. I work in diversity recruitment and wanted to give Erica the opportunity to introduce herself.
Great. Thank you so much, Gerardo. Again, my name is Erica Sandoval. Just a couple things about Gerardo and I on here. My specific work, I work in global diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. I do a lot of side things as well as my full-time job in the consulting world, but I also do consulting for the private and public sector as volunteer. I love yoga. I like to volunteer my time teaching bilingual yoga, and some of you may have joined me for some of the meditation sessions we've had here in Tequeria. So, Gerardo, anything else you want to say about yourself?
I work within, like I mentioned, the diversity recruitment space, specifically in higher education. So work a lot with students who are interested in the business space and going into tech. Outside of work, I like to eat tacos. I do consider myself a coffee connoisseur, as well as enjoy house music, which is one of my passions. And if you're interested on that Spotify playlist, definitely reach out to me. But with that, we are going to get started.
Great. Thank you so much. So just kind of a little backdrop. This is like a cafecito. So you are welcome to come on camera if that is accessible to you, or drop in the chat. So we just want to make this as interactive as possible. So we started off the conversation by saying, where are you joining us from today? Gerardo is joining also from, he is from the Denver area. Let him give a little bit more of a background. I'm based currently, right now I'm in Denver, Colorado. But really what we really want to expand this conversation is for everybody. And I love the representation that is on this call, because I think so much as what we're starting to expand here is that the Latinx, Hispanic population, Latin, has really expanded in the last decade. We've seen an expansive growth. And as you can see, Gerardo and I are joining you from the middle of the country, based in Colorado. And I think some folks always wonder why, is there Latinos in Colorado? Yes, 62 million strong. And what we've seen in the top 5 states with the largest growth of Latino population since 2010 are states that we don't expect: Louisiana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, Vermont, folks that are often missed in this representation of Latinx and Latin. So we want to make sure we're representing as well. I travel a lot for my type of work, and I will tell you, every corner of the country that I go to, as well as Canada, I find Latinos everywhere. I find authentic food everywhere in every corner. So I want to make sure that we are bringing that representation. Just a little bit about my background. I shifted back and forth between Mexico and central Kansas. So if any folks are from the Midwest, I totally understand the representation from small town. And then I'll let Gerardo, speak a little bit about his upbringing as we get the conversation really started. But that's kind of what we really want to paint the picture, is that these demographics are changing. Our numbers are changing. Some of you that are joining the call may be from Generation Z, which 25% of Generation Z in the entire country is Latino Latinx, and 30%, so folks all the way up to the age of 18, is making up of Gen Alpha, make up Latinos of that Gen Alpha population. So we are growing. The median age is 28 years of age. So I'm super excited to be here with you all to kind of explain how can we move along and move those folks in these generations that are coming into the workplace, into these workspaces. So that's a little bit about what Gerardo and I are going to be talking about. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about cultural barriers. So the cultural barriers, we kind of really wanted to start with this, because I think this is something that we all grapple with at different stages of our life. If we're really talking about lived experiences, and specifically, for example, the education system, many of us come from so many different backgrounds, the traditional background from trades and skills. So that's something that's not talked about often, and we want to really bring highlights to that as well. And then the other part we're going to talk about is these unwritten rules that happen often in the world of academia and the world of corporate world, and even in the public sector. So some of the things that we really want to highlight. But before we get started, since we're really talking about identity, and we want you to drop into the chat, who are you? In one word, what would you say is that one word? I love the representation that's happening here, as I see on the chat, but is there a word that you would say describes you? 1 to 2 words, if you could drop in the chat. What is that 1 to 2 words? Matriarch, love it, from Elia. Anyone else? Learner. Okay. Even streaks finder, servant leader. Awesome. Multicultural. Creator. Love it. So that one word or something that would be to describe you. Resilient. I don't know about you, Gerardo, but I'm resonating with a lot of these. Californian.
A lot of them. If you don't mind me asking, what would be your word, Erika?
Is it appropriate for the screen? Or, I would say for me, it would be, it would really be connector. It's one of my big ones. If I don't want to see the word that's appropriate on the Tequeria screen to describe who I am, but y'all know what I'm going with. But there's so many words, and I think they change so through often out my life, and that's something we're going to talk about. But Gerardo, I really want to get the conversation started about shaping the narrative, because I think this is so important to really move us forward about lived experiences. So Gerardo, can you get us started to really talk about what is lived experiences? What does that even mean? And how do we use them to shape our own narrative? And perhaps maybe you can go in a little bit deeper to give us some examples of how you've done it, maybe how you're seeing some of your students or folks entering into the workspace. And then you can give us your word.
Yeah, so I when we're thinking about lived experiences, it's the opportunity or the experiences that you've had in your life and how those have shaped you or influenced your decision. I think for me, I often go directly into my intersection of my identity. So as a Latino, queer, first generation, college graduate, a male of color, how has that lens and that perspective influenced my life? And oftentimes I entered higher education and not knowing about myself, my identity. Here in Colorado, when we were having this conversation, Erika and I was, where she was surprised about how I didn't necessarily get that higher, that Mexican-American history until I was in college. And so in that space, when I entered higher education, I was always questioning who I was, where my family came from, that identity. And so I got really involved on campus. I was that person that showed up to everything, and that was part of the different conversations. And so ultimately, when I completed my degree, I felt like I had to continue having to navigate those spaces of who, what, when, where in my career. Like, what does professionalism look like? What does professionalism look like within myself? And so in that space, I had to look at those forms of resiliency that my mom and my dad definitely taught me. They were entrepreneurs. And so I really had to self-reflect and identify what were those spaces that my story continued to change. And ultimately, I had to, like a lot of people are doing now, you are allowed to kind of change directions in your career and relearn, upskill, and allow yourself to change your story. And so within that space, I work with a lot of students who are going into higher education or going into the business space and don't necessarily understand themselves or fit into a space that is quote unquote professionalism. So ultimately, I had to kind of accept my story and where I came from, and change myself, embrace myself, even just based off of the fact of not introducing myself as Gerardo or Gerardo, but showing up in authentic spaces as Gerardo and correcting people to pronounce that in Gerardo. But ultimately, that was kind of one example of how I've used my lived experiences and connecting those into my professional space.
Great. Gerardo, I have a question on that, because I think the name, there's a lot of conversations on how we pronounce the name and names of how, even just the way you say my name. I think it means a lot to me when, I get my name pronounced in that way, especially if folks are Spanish speakers. But how do you approach someone if that connection isn't there, right? So if you need to correct someone on your name, or someone it's like a learning moment, how do you go about something like that? Because I know for me, sometimes it can be a struggle, right? It's where do you kind of draw the line and balance that? So what can what kind of things have you done to kind of approach that and ease into something such as like even your name, Gerardo?
I think it's often in those spaces where you do have to I've capitalized my name in some emails of like Gerardo, but I have had to have some conversations with some faculty and individuals that like, hey, this is actually my name is not Gerard or Gerardo. I prefer Gerardo, or even Gerardo, like Gerardo. Like if you're attempting to say my name correctly, I have had some awkward interactions. I think nothing's more awkward than going to that Starbucks and then changing my name to Gerardo, which was the first time that interaction happened.
I'm sorry, what? To what name?
To Gerardo with a Z.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard that one. Okay.
Awesome. But no, go ahead.
No. I was just wondering what the name was, but go ahead, continue. I'm sorry. I just kind of chuckled there for a second.
No, and so even within just like in work environments, it's definitely oftentimes just holding true to your values and your identity. Oftentimes, you know, I've had to go into spaces and be like, hey, it is you recognize that you're not the individual that the predominant population are in those spaces. So oftentimes there's a curiosity of them wanting to learn that name, but it's definitely had to be a interesting conversation. But definitely appreciate you sharing kind of your the appreciation for me pronouncing your name correctly, because I've want to do that as much with people just because I've struggled with that throughout my career.
Thank you, Gerardo. And I'm seeing in the chat that folks are also, this is resonating a lot with folks with name pronunciation as well. And I love how folks are reclaiming that. I guess I want to talk about these unwritten rules then. How do you navigate? You know, we do have corporate world here, but I'm just curious if folks are from the private sector as well, from the public sector. I'm sure there's public sector folks on this call. Public sector, private sector, nonprofit world, education. These unwritten rules are really in every institution in the foundation, especially here in the United States. So I'm so curious, how do you know what are these unwritten rules, or how do you I think a lot of folks, I'm already like mid-career and I still feel like these a lot of unwritten rules that I'm facing. So I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I do not, but I think there's always a new acronym for something in the workflow of things happening in space. So ongoing list of that one.
I think especially in the world of education, I know you're working a lot with folks who are coming in, first gen and things like that. I think there's a lot of unwritten rules also in the form of education system, right? You go into college and then you're like dumped. Well, anyway, I know a lot of folks that have that experience, especially if you're going for a predominantly white institution, if you're on this type of campus, if you're trying to navigate a boot camp, if you're really trying to navigate those spaces of tech, right? I think that's something that we really want to expand on, is to talk about these unwritten rules and how we can do to transition into the workplace. So I want to kind of take that to really talk about how does this impact then have in the workplace and what kind of conversations we can have. So I'll hand it to you, Gerardo.
Awesome. I think oftentimes within your career, you have to move past the spaces of being comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's definitely a place where you, as a first generation individual, you oftentimes are going to be the first in those spaces, and transitioning from being an individual who is new to these environments. I definitely think that we have to embrace our culture. But I know that your career and your trajectory, your story is definitely one that I would love for people to hear, Erika, but how have you navigated your identity in the workplace?
Great. Thanks. I think this is for... we have a question coming in, and I want to. Doesn't workplace culture assimilation help when getting promotions, though? Great. That's something Giovanni has typed in the chat, and we're going to address that here in a second. I think for me, that's been a constant struggle is the assimilation and what kind of that means, right, in the space of anything. And so I think it's how do you navigate those spaces? Just to this question, Giovanni, is like, how do I be true to my identity and still navigate the spaces that we're working in? I think that's critically important to understand how we do that. And it's tricky. And I think for me, one of the things that, and I would love to hear others on the chat, what experiences this has been, predominantly understanding yourself. Self-awareness is like the most critical component to understanding anything with cultural competency or who am I? I think that's the part we really have to start. And I think for a lot of folks who are on this call who may be bicultural, multicultural in your upbringing of navigating various spaces throughout your life, it's really how do I move from understanding myself within the space that I am in. For example, my family, right? So what would my family say that I'm doing? And Gerardo, you were talking about being involved in all of that. I know as a first gen Latina, female, Mexicana, oldest in my family, it becomes really tricky because then I'm going to be like, ¿qué dirá la gente, right? ¿Qué dirán mis tías? Y siempre hay los chismosos, right? So how do I navigate that space? That kind of started as my first journey because chismosos siempre va a haber. There's always the chismosos in any type of space, right? So navigating that space, that self-awareness is critical so we can move into owning our own story. And it really is self-reflection. It's understanding I've had the privilege to live in various parts of the world. And I think for me, that's been, from my upbringing in a very rural part of Mexico, where the village where my family still lives, there's no electricity, still running water. Shocked, yes. But to come into a rural community in central Kansas, I think for me, those two identities that I've had to navigate, and then who am I within my own family, like I just said, ¿qué dirá la gente, right? And then moving into at the education system when there was predominantly very little Latinos in my in a predominantly white institution at that time, and then moving into the space of the corporate world. So going back to Giovanni's thing of cultural assimilation, I think the biggest thing is close my Facebook. I love it. Yes, actually someone hacked my Facebook, so I don't have Facebook anymore. So I don't get to see, my family doesn't get to see a lot of those. I've learned that you have to be willing to make others uncomfortable so you can realize how their biases make you feel. And it's when a conversation can begin a lot of time. Yes, the uncomfortableness, I think uncomfortableness within ourselves and the uncomfortableness of how we're making others feel. And I think the big part there is that how do we call folks in for something like that? And I think that's the most critical part of really moving into the space of navigating work. And I'll give you an example of connecting this. For me, being first gen, being from a very low income family, a migrant family, I think, of things that are happening, especially right now with what we see in DACA. I grew up in a very multi-layered family and multi-status family, which had a lot of impact that had to do with my upbringing. And so I think for me, that in itself was like, how am I going to own this in spaces where it's not always often? And it's taken time. And Gerardo, you bring out an interesting point when you're talking about career. I work a lot of times working with frontline staff and advocating for frontline staff. So these are the folks who perhaps are working in spaces that we don't recognize enough, right? Who are the folks of our custodians? Who are the folks that are cleaning our areas? These are our construction folks, our healthcare workers, all of these spaces where we are so predominant in, and I think so unrecognized. And so I spend a lot of time working on advocating for these folks in the workspace. And I think for me, it's like then having worked these type of jobs myself and coming from this family and then advocating for these folks and then taking it into the corporate world and letting others understand how to shape that narrative has been one of the biggest things for me, I think, across my trajectory, to be able to bring it all together. And it really started from understanding myself. I think that's the most critical piece. And then how do I bring it into the corporate worlds where others can recognize that? Like, we need to understand the voice of these folks because they make a significant impact in the work. I mean, 80% of the global workforce doesn't even sit at a desk. And I think people forget that. So how do we even bring that so that, I had to navigate my own story to help bring that story. I don't know if that kind of answers that part of that question. That was really long.
It's definitely important to kind of not forget about that identity too. I think we, as we're moving up in like corporate ladder and professional spaces, it's oftentimes, what at the forefront, what identity do I have. I think oftentimes the one thing that my family instilled in me was oftentimes focusing on perfectionism, even within my like the work, or like leave a detail, like leave a work that's going to leave an impact after you leave. And I've have had to kind of accept the fact that like perfectionism or the space of like, hey, it's not, it doesn't exist. So I've embraced that, and professionally, I think that it's been often a place that I've grown a little bit. I know we had a conversation briefly about how that does impact careers. If you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, Erica.
Yeah, and I think Natalie dropped something in the chat talking about this assimilating, right, to the tech corporate world and how to be. She states, "I'm loud with my culture in a visual way, no longer shying away." So point on. I think that's excellent, Natalie. It's like trying to find these spaces of where you can kind of find that balance. Like, so for me, I mean, obviously, I was in a rush today and I forgot my hoops, and I feel very naked without my hoops today. But that's like one significant part of it. I'm presenting a lot of the time. I present in various types of spaces, and I always have hoops. And some of you that are on this call who personally know me know I'm always wearing hoops, gold or silver, whatever you want to call it. And so that in itself is I'm not going to be shy about it, right? It's let me wear this color, or let me bold representation into this space. And I think another thing that we have to remember is what is the way that we are contributing our skills and our assets, and how do we highlight that at the same time of navigating our space of being loud. So I think that's one of the things that it's a constant struggle, and I think it's going to become less and less as we become more visible. And that's why we started with those stats. If we're talking about numbers, right? The numbers are, Gerardo, you grew up in Colorado, and I think folks, when I'm talking to folks in my type of job, folks are like, wait, there's Latinos in Colorado, and
we're here.
and someone on this call was from Utah. There's a significant population of Latinos in Utah as well. And so I saw some other folks on this, and I think that representation we're going to be seeing more and more. Oh, Colorado in the house, someone else, Luis Valencia. So I think that in itself is going to be critical. And Gerardo, you brought up Bad Bunny yesterday when we had a conversation. I don't know if you want to highlight a little bit for some folks, whether you love Bad Bunny or hate Bad Bunny, but the stats are important.
We play Bad Bunny in my household, in this car when I'm driving. But yeah, I think it just seems like the impact of his most recent concert. I think he broke his own record twice of like his all of his concert like being one of the most like revenue made off of a tour. And the connection is that like our impact in our career and those changes just culturally in the United States are recognizable. I mean, algún día vamos a poder estar teniendo esta conversación en español, and so like even the linguistic changes of embracing both of the duality of English and Spanish, that oftentimes I think you have to be like your cultural capital versus like your social capital, I think personally has gotten me a lot more further professionally. I think like not being afraid to be loud, as we were talking about earlier, not being afraid of pronouncing your name correctly or correcting somebody, and it's just those cultural changes that are happening that you're accepting ourselves a little bit more and comfortable in these tech spaces, and are able to have those or use our cultural capital in a matter that is now becoming social capital in our connections and our avenues and how we network and talk with other individuals. I don't know if you want to kind of add a little bit more onto those spaces of our capital, our cultural capital transitioning into social capital.
Yeah, Gerardo, as we're on this subject, I think it's important to remember we are not monolithic. And I think that's something that the corporate world doesn't quite understand yet in our academia or these other institutional structures that we have. Monolithic, we're so many different identities, and I think it's so important to address this intersectionality, right? We have Asian Latinos, we have Black Latinos, there's intersectionality of the LGBTQ community, which you started the conversation with that piece. There's so many, indigenous intersectionality. I have several friends who have Nahuatl names, and they always talk about how that's even pronounced within even Spanish speakers. I think those are important things to remember as we're talking about building this cultural capital to really move into social spaces, and social spaces as in the education system, and how do we bring that forward. And I think one of the key things is, and what we're going to go into here in a little bit, is talk about how do we build this community of trust, and how do we bring forward a safety of our advocates to push us forward in our career, because we have so many different questions of depending where we're at, and navigating the tech space is one of those things that, you know, is very interesting because of the different phases and different locations of where we're at, and perhaps what the tech organization represents. And we're gonna go into that. But I think it's important to really address the cultural capital versus social capital. Also, the word of exhaustion. The recognizing the great value we bring to the tech world is crucial, and is also understanding the biases that exist in the tech world today. Absolutely, Adriana. And I think that's one of the things as we start talking about La Chamba is when you're choosing an organization and when you're interviewing for an organization, it is okay for you as a candidate to do that research of that organization, right? Look at the brand, look at who are the folks that are represented. It's not just looking at how many diversity awards did they win, but take the time to make those connections and see what the folks within the organization are saying. Taqueria is an excellent space for that. And that's the second part we're going to talk about. How do you tap into these spaces to really understand what's happening within? Because you know the saying, right? Dime con quién andas, right, Gerardo?
Te diré quién eres.
Yeah, tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. And I think that's a lot within the world of work and the world of tech, especially. The tech world can be very, very dominating, but it's also understanding of how do we find those allies. So anything else you want to add to that, Gerardo?
No, I think one even just conversation, point that Chris added is, I think we're always like code switching on some level depending on ages, culture, but it is getting better. I think as me and you are millennials, and we see like Gen Zers coming into the workforce, it's definitely been that cultural changes that are happening, and it's still a brand new space for the generations after us. So being able to share out the knowledge of like how to get into tech and taqueria, creating these spaces is definitely important for us to continue to build on our social cultural capital in tech.
Okay, great. Yeah, I love that. And one thing to add on these generations, Gen Z is going to be the majority of the workforce by 2030. Not too far away. And if there are any Gen Z folks on this call, I just want to give a shout out for being bold, for being loud. You know, I came from the generation where it was like we're trying to navigate the space of being bold, right? Into these spaces of I always go back to like J-Lo's Let's Get Loud song, but Gen Z's coming in with this full blast with a whole different perspective of really looking at those perspectives. So I find that very, very promising. So I'm excited, and Gen Alpha as well. Giovanni, look at the leadership of the company. If it's mostly white, then assimilation is a good strategy to move up in the company. And Giovanni, I think that's what we're going to go into is how do we find those allies, right? I think it's finding folks who are in those privileged positions. Right. It's not a surprise that the most common name of CEOs is John. Right. That's statistically shown and proven, and the research shows. So how do we find Johns that can be our allies? And that's the second part that we're going to get into. So this is the area of consejos. Gerardo, you want to get us started on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think for our consejos, I can start off with mine, which is at multiple levels. I think we've talked about like ¿qué va a decir la gente? And oftentimes when we started having this conversation, it was like, okay, well, what is social? Like, be unapologetically yourself on LinkedIn. I think for people, we've seen oftentimes of toxic positivity more than once on LinkedIn, and that originality and perspective coming from you is definitely one that we need in those spaces, and I've seen definitely growing a little bit more. I know in researching for this, we definitely know that those opportunities and word of mouth, we have some family, I have family members, or put it like drop an emoji or something, or like put your hand up if you have family members or someone who enjoys chisme. But imagine if we spread chisme like we do, all those opportunities that are out there professionally, the impact that we can have on our network, and being able to share those opportunities is definitely a space that we have the place to impact our colleagues or our compadres or comadres. And then I like to say that if be a connector, don't be a hater. And then the last one, as we were talking about, is don't undersell yourself.
Gerardo, with that, we're getting some really good responses. Someone saying they love the slide. We want to hear in the chat, where are folks in their career journey? Are folks at the beginning? I think that's something to talk about, right? You're navigating or changing careers, etc. Are you mid-level, right? Mid-career level, at least 5 years of experience, or senior after at least almost 10 years of experience? So can you drop in the chat? We're just very curious, where are folks around their career journey right now? Switching careers, beginning of a new career, changing careers, getting into tech 2 years ago, but stuck and don't know where to go next, mid-career, entry level, okay, 5+ years. I'm new to the tech space, former educator, looking for entry level. Hola, Erika, trying to break into tech. Senior backend Java developer, good consejos, switching. Senior level, expanding side consulting, tech for 2 years, starting. Whoa. Trying to break into tech from HR, new to the tech space, looking for a second tech job. Transitioning from military to tech. I love this. Y'all keep dropping this in. This is great because unidos se hace la fuerza, right? So if we all can see this, hiring Python devs if anyone is looking. Oh, thanks, Chris. See, we got the connectors on here. Trying to break into tech from HR. Okay, great. Lisa, reach out to me. I've worked for a very large HR tech company. In tech for 2 years, switched from HR to M&A. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I love that. We wanted to kind of just paint this picture because one of the things that I have really learned along my career is everyone always says it's not what you know, it's who you know. But one of the things I've noticed throughout my career, 15+ years, is it's not also that, but it's also not who you know, but it's also who knows you. So this in itself, this connected building, that's why Tequeria is an excellent space for this to really drop in. I highly encourage you all to join some of the channels if that's kind of where you're at in your career space. The owning the story, I just cannot stress enough why that's important, because as we were having in the discussion earlier about, how do we connect with folks? Giovanni was talking about how do we connect with upper leadership and those kind of things. If you're able to own your story and connect into, oh, Angel, you are my guy. This is connect with me, Angel. I would love to connect about manufacturing blue collar. Spend a lot of time talking in that space about upskilling and reskilling. But you have to really own your story to be able to connect then to leadership, right? You have to have that connection of how you fluctuate. And I think that's critical, to own your story so that you can be able to connect easily. One of the ways to do that, if you are in the tech space already or within an organization, highly encourage employee resource groups or affinity groups, or even on your college campus. That Gerardo can tell us here in a little bit of what kind of connections exist, even for alumni, or what kind of things can exist. I mean, y'all, you paid all that money for tuition, so Gerardo, there's got to be something in there for us, right? So I think that one's important to really make sure you're leveraging those connections. Love everyone that's dropping in their LinkedIn, right? The support system. Omar dropped network. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you find your support system. Social media, I mean, the way that we are in the age of technology is one of the most excellent ways. I spend my time, half of the time, between Mexico City and Denver, if I'm not traveling all over the place. But the way I'm able to connect with the community is through the power of technology. Yes, I know it has its limits, but find those spaces, like I mentioned, Tequeria, finding Latinas in tech, finding Haku, finding so many of those other organizations that can help. LinkedIn. I don't want to go into this whole full powerful session on why LinkedIn should be your best friend, right? But so much of this is impactful to find exactly where you can find these connected networks. I'm going to drop into the chat real quick here as I'm saying, software engineer with 4+ years of experience and want to be in Web3 blockchain space. Hit me up. Thank you, Luis. Call it out. Former company guild, partners with many organizations that pay for employees. I would look into those programs at your current companies. free education for most of those programs. Exactly. A lot of companies are starting to invest in upskilling and reskilling, and there's a lot of free resources. So let's tap that in. Senior PM switching, background in tech, starting as sales development rep, transition to online community, career change, went from business to cybersecurity over a year ago. You can ask me anything. All right. Networking, Tacoma. All right. So I'm going to go back to this last one here where I want to really highlight this space of what is the difference between a resume and a brand resume. I do not have a slide for this because it can fluctuate. I've seen it called board of directors. Your own personal board of directors. So some of you might have heard of it in this way. It's kind of similar, but this is one of the top things that I can tell you. And one of my friends, we have a mutual friend, Gerardo, actually, and she may not be on this call, but she gave me this piece of advice, and I will remember this forever. She says, when you're networking with someone and you ask for a job, you will get advice. And when you ask for advice, you get a job. So I'll repeat that. When you ask for a job, you get advice. When you ask for advice, you get a job. So basically what she meant and what it is, and it's true, connect, and network and make it authentic. So the resume really gives you a snapshot, right? There's a Taqueria channel even for resumes where you can see and folks are sharing the resumes. But the brand resume is literally who you are and your snapshot, so that when you're making these connections con tus comadres y tus compadres, your connections in your networks, that is that sheet or a summary, depending on the space that you're in, right? If you do user experience, you may be more hands-on on the design. That is not me. Mine's more, basic of just having some color and some brands separated. What are the things that should be highlighted on this brand resume, right? Think about it almost like Canva would be a great space to start on this, to really display things that you want to pop out in case, let's just give an example. Gerardo, someone in your network has a job and you thought about me and you need to explain to someone in your network, but they don't know me. So how is this compadre going to start? How are we going to network this? By having something specific of a brand resume, so a one-sheet snapshot of my skills, my accomplishments, where I'm wanting to go, maybe some of the personal things. Like, for example, I'm telling you, I always highlight those jobs that I had in my brand resume. I always talk about my frontline work experience because that is critical for me. My time when I spent in roofing, my time when, helping my dad with concrete work, working specifically of waiting tables for at least 15 years and managing a restaurant. Those kind of things are critical and important to my identity. And I want to be able to push this forward. So I would highlight this on my brand resume of why they're important to me and how I'm trying to execute this into the workspace. So those of your brand is going to be critical, really highlighting those spaces, because not everyone has the time to read a resume. That's critical. It's just this one snapshot that tells you more, right?
Not a lot of people even read resumes a lot anymore, which even at that. One item that I even had a question is like, I know CVs, our cover letters, are not a thing anymore. Is this a space that you are kind of able to use this brand resume to share out, like you said, immediately with your network? But is this something, like, I'm trying to think, like, where will you save this as? Like, is this something that you have internally and then share out with like your compadres and your comadres and that network that roots you up? Or how have you used this to kind of go into those spaces?
Great. Thank you. Good question, Gerardo. And I want to address cover letter suck. Show me your GitHub. Love it, Henry. So it doesn't matter what kind of tech you are doing. So if you have a GitHub, this is kind of like this snapshot. And where do you keep this, Gerardo? In your back pocket. Uno nunca sabe. You could be, you have no idea the connectedness that happens. And that's really about that connection that can happen. So if you meet someone, or Gerardo, you meet someone, and in your little circle that you have, right? That's why some folks call it board of directors. Who's in your network of board of directors? You may know someone connected into that industry. So then si sale algo, you have it right there at your hand, the snapshot to hand to someone that shows exactly to break in the conversation of a cafecito, right? A 30-minute, a 15-minute cafecito, instead of trying to dig through a resume or dig through a cover letter. As Henry said, they kind of suck, right? Or, GitHub can only show me so much of what I'm looking at. But if you're able to show these kind of things into an interest. I've seen it done in so many different ways, especially folks who may be programmers, folks who may be designers, or folks who may be in like this coming from social science areas or education. It is an array of ways, but it's the snapshot so someone can see it and have it handy. Have it in your drive where you can share it with someone specifically. I've also seen it at career fairs where people bring that forward and the resume. That's a good area to couple with. Another good thing, and that I've heard also from friends that I have in talent acquisition and recruiters, is that if you forget to say something in your interview, let's say you nailed the phone call or you just forgot, that tends to happen to a lot of us, to me included, you can send this summary then, I forgot to mention, I just want to include this, that gives a snapshot more of who I am. And then you can send that off to also the recruiter. That's much appreciated for a recruiter, because then they're not looking at that, 20-second to 60-second glance that folks are saying. Brand narrative. Purpose, theme, strengths, 100%. What are those skills that you're going to bring forward, right? That you're going to bring into the job. So think about the job that you're looking at. It's just like a resume in the sense of, for example, if you're applying for a network position, right? So what are the things that you would pull from that job description into your resume, or the things that you need? But now you need a bigger glance onto this brand resume to show me specifically what is your trajectory of what you're trying to do in the next, for example, 5 years, or some of those strengths, and highlight them with specific outlines that you may have. And this is like a one-pager snapshot. I've seen it with folks that I know are in user experience or design who have used pictures, solely pictures and infographics. That's because of the type of industry they're in, and that's their jam, right? So you can be very creative depending, right? The why, the how, the what. I love that, Oman. Yes, you need to be able to have that into your brand resume. It's just like a snapshot. Don't forget outcomes and analytics. 100%. We need metrics. We need numbers. Those of you that are coming out of, that are trying to break into tech, Gerardo and I came from the public sector as well, is sometimes we forget the numbers and the metrics, and we have to be able to reach that. The STAR method is incredible. I know a lot of tech companies will send out, so you can Google after this discussion, STAR for STAR interviewing, right? Situation, task, assessment, result. Really looking at that into your resume, but also in the snapshot, right? We want percents, we want numbers. We've got to be able to show the metrics of how you're going to move forward and make that difference. That is critical in the tech world, and we got to be able to highlight those things. Gerardo?
So for all like my Canva, Photoshop people, I think this is like your moment to shine and be able to have the opportunity to share out those items. And even like having this conversation with you, Erika, is a space where working with a lot of individuals who's breaking into tech, or students working in a business school, it's something that's new for us, is working with all of them to ensure that they have all of these new skills, which is for me like coding, and the business world has adapted to it. But it is also something that I had not heard of like being able to have something that includes the different skill sets that you are highlighting. But I'm like a different space. I think it's how have you used this, if you're able to share, as a tool with your network? Have you shared this type of document with someone else in like your network, or someone who's looking for a position within your job? Or do you have any concrete examples of where this has kind of worked for some individuals?
Yes, great example. So I would say one of the best things about having something like this, it also helps your pitch. Helps your elevator pitch to move forward. As you can tell, I'm much of a talker. I talk with my hands. I like to speak. And not everyone has that or can feel comfortable doing that. And I get that, right? My partner's in analytics, and he continuously talks. He's like, how do you do your job? I can't be in front of a stage and hundreds of people. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't do analytics is something I want to really hone in on and get in it and get in more in analytical work for me. So yes, you can see it's that cross-training, cross-collaborative that's so important. But why is it important? Because it gives that snapshot. For example, you may have someone who's connected to someone who works, let's say, in HR, or who works in consulting and has no idea about coding or any idea about networking or anything about cybersecurity or any of that. But the fact that they work in that organization and they may be that connector to the other person, they may be that connector. And I've seen that work where that type of relationship and building has helped folks get their foot in the door into the world of tech. Not just, we have to remember not just the job, but when we ask for a job, we're going to get advice. Connecting with folks to get advice. And remember when I said doing your research about organizations, I think that's a really good way to put it when you're looking at a company, because the company's snapshot can only give us so much. If we're able to like send a private message if we send a private message on LinkedIn, it's one of the best ways to see if we can, can I grab 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of your time for a cafecito? And I want to just kind of have a discussion with you. What's been your journey into the position that you're at or the type of company that you're at? And then you have your snapshot. You can send it to this individual, the brand resume, and be like, hey, that's just a little bit about me before we get started. I just kind of want to have this discussion. Because if this person only has 10 minutes, Gerardo, it is a lot to cram in 10 minutes. Now you've sent this brand resume and you can then start to collaborate a discussion from that. So I've seen that very, very helpful. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah,
10 to 15 minutes. So people are more inclined to say yes, usually get more. 100%, Luis, because people are so busy, and depending right where folks are, whether mid-career or where they may be at, 10 to 15 minutes is awesome. Honor those people's time. I can't stress that enough. I know sometimes things come up, but honor those 10 to 15 minutes as much as you can. And if you can't do video, just do a phone call. Just do an old school phone call, 10 to 15 minutes, tap into this person, and you can learn something different. And it's really important. And I want to get on the subject, Gerardo, because I think it's important that we have our comadres and compadres, these connectors into our space. Make sure that we have people that we can go to, for example, as a coach, right? That I can ask these questions as they're starting to build this network. Look at folks who can be your sponsor. And I'm sure there's folks that have been on Tequeria that have been talking about sponsorship. Sponsorship is important because those are the comadres y the compadres who are connected in the organization and will be able to advocate, that could help you land a job or within your organization, help move into promotion, help move closer into the areas that you need to be. So that sponsorship is critical. And then one thing that's also, I think, not talked enough is your therapist. I just want to touch mental health is critical. It is critical for our community. It is critical for generational trauma. And, if for those of you who have seen Encanto, it's real, right? We have that real. We talked about, the tías chismosas and things that happen, but therapy is critical. Find the space where you can find a network to connect because our amigas can chismear with us so much, right? Our friends can only give us so much, but mental health is critical. How can we help our community if we haven't put our oxygen mask on ourselves to help others? And I know that's very individualistic perspective, but we got to do that. Gerardo?
And I think that's even just a theme with I've really into like podcasts and like leadership podcasts and professional development. And I think talking to your therapist and being able to be vulnerable with them definitely helps you to perform at a higher level. It's being in those spaces where it is stressful due to the work environment based off of just the cultural space of the type of work that you're doing. In order for you to show up authentically in spaces, it's important for you to do the work both for your mental health to ensure that you're showing up and being able to show up and do the work that you are supposed to be doing, but also show up and being able to help others in the space of entering tech and other spaces. But I really appreciated you adding that perspective because it is like number one, as Sandra mentioned, for all of us to seek and ensure that we are okay with ourselves so that we are reflecting into the world the kind of energy we want to attract in our careers too.
Yeah. Gerardo, and speaking of that, I think another thing that I didn't mention earlier is I think so much in Latinx, Latin, Hispanic culture, we always are looking for our work to speak to itself. And that's something that I've kind of, still navigating. I want my work to speak to myself. I don't want to be the one that's like tooting my own horn and mírame que estoy haciendo. And I think that is navigating those spaces, right? And we see people who do that really well, and some of us may feel uncomfortable to do that. And so I think that's another thing of how can we have our work speak to ourselves, and having this network, a brand resume, having our cheerleaders, having our support system. That's an excellent way to start building this, that others can see those things that we are doing, right? That we can contribute and push forward. Because I think quite often that's something that I know for me has been something my whole life, that, my hard work should speak for itself. Y hay que trabajar duro. Para eso venimos al norte a trabajar duro, right? Like, we got to work hard because that's the dream and that's what we got to do. But navigating those spaces is going to be also very, very critical for us and for our community. And I think with that, we want to open up for questions or anything else that folks may have. We can drop into the chat. We have plenty of time because remember, this is like a cafecito. We really wanted to engage you all. So thank you so much. The chat has been really on fire. So thank you.
Yeah.
Gerardo?
Any tips too that you have? I know that, as I said, my quote was, don't be a connector, don't be a hater or a gatekeeper. So if there's any tips that anyone wants to drop within the chat, definitely feel free to do that. But if there's something we didn't touch on, or tips of using your kind of lived experiences in these spaces, we definitely want to hear about it, because we want to be sure to add that to kind of our toolkit.
Luis came in, for real, don't gatekeep. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. Great. More on how not to undersell. I'm in the process of negotiating a job offer. Oh, Ginny, love it. I can talk a little bit about this, and then Gerardo has anything on underselling. Number one thing to really remember on the negotiation is, the stats are there where folks are saying, I'm going into statistics because I talk a lot about pay equity, and Gerardo and I are based in Colorado, so there's a whole pay transparency conversation as well. The number one thing is, I think, to remember on this conversation, as the stats show, women negotiate. I'm just going to use that. Women negotiate for a job, even though people say that women don't negotiate, they do. But it's a matter of how we do it, and the statistics show, right, that men are hired for potential, right? And not just men, underrepresented folks can fall into the category as well, right? Where overrepresented folks are hired for potential, while women are looked at for past achievements, or underrepresented folks are looked at more for past achievements instead of potential. So one of the things that I would say is stand strong on what you've done your research, right? Look at what the market looks like where you're at. That's critical, number one. And stand very, very firm of where you're at. If you're negotiating your entire salary package, if you're negotiating equity, if you're negotiating all the other entities that go within that, there's a Slack channel, Jenny. I highly recommend you go in on this specific topic on tequeria. And it's really, really important to keep that in mind and stand, right? Your first intuition is probably going to be right. I've heard to improve pay equity, companies are moving forward to stopping negotiating compensations on hires. Do you see that as a net positive or a negative for hiring diversity? How you should deal with that? And when I mean, thank you, Camilo, for bringing that. When I'm bringing negotiation into the picture, I'm not saying negotiating the salary, because pay equity is that. It's to help that. It's to be firm. It's like, if they come in with something, yes, because you've done your homework, that is the salary range, especially if you live in California, New York, coming soon, or I think just now in the fall, right? Looking at Washington State coming in January, Colorado. For me, this is my personal, it is hard. I talk to folks in HR all of the time. I talk to folks who are working on doing a lot of the comp analysis, and it's hard work. Yes, it is. It is a lot for a company to go through that. But for me, I see it as a positive as we're going to move forward to having these transparency. And I just want to I also work in speaking to a lot of global companies. In the US, it is perhaps the most taboo to talk about salary than anywhere else. So I think we're going to be moving past that. Gerardo, do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I think we're exactly what you were saying to the salaries. I think we've probably been all on those conversations where, like, well, can you tell me like if this falls within the range? And for all my HR folks, I think that or talent acquisition, I think that those questions are always kind of awkward. But even just the pay equity up front gives you kind of a range to shoot for. Because ultimately, I think you are then not underselling yourself if we're talking about salary. But that's one of the points that I wanted to add. But I know no, go ahead.
I want to add to Ginny. Ginny, when you go into this, you be firm, be strong, because you know, right? Well, you know your worth. You know what you're going to go into that, and that's the part that we started the conversation. For me, when I'm in those uncomfortable situations, like where I'm talking about like promotion, right? So having those conversations of promotion, one thing always goes back to my mind is my parents. What did my parents do for me? And where they've gone, and I see those struggles and all of that, and I'm getting kind of emotional now. It's like, no, I am not backing down. Oh, heck no, I am not backing down. This is where I'm going to move forward. Yo sé lo que valgo. I know my values. This is where I'm going forward, and I'm going to push towards that. And folks have dropped in here some ways to look at salary. And another way to look at salary also is have conversations with folks in those organizations. If they don't want to disclose the salary, then ask them, what are the benefits like? What's the culture like? You don't want no tóxicos y tóxicas around more. Like that also should contribute to the conversation when you're negotiating as well. Gerardo?
No, I think that ultimately within you choosing a company that you want to be at, it's also just goes back even to, are you going to be happy there because of the culture? Are you going to have the resources to support you as a person of color or the intersection of your identities? Again, going into the salary conversation is that you can negotiate. I think the only limit that you set for yourselves is exactly that, the limit that you put for yourself, and you're able to influence that decision on what your salary outcome is. But again, I appreciate all the resources that were shared on there, and know that you have to get out of that one, deficit mentality, and two, imposter syndrome, that you deserve to be in that space, you deserve the salary that you want, and that you are going to obtain the position that you're looking for, no matter where that is or no matter what space that is.
Love it, Gerardo. I think we have one more. If there's one more question, we got about a minute left. If anyone wants to drop anything else, I love folks is people cheering on here, because that's why unidos hace la fuerza. I identify as Mexican. There's always this discussion. El peor enemigo de un mexicano es otro mexicano. The worst enemy of a Mexican is another Mexican. And we need to move away past that. Unidos is the way that we're going to move this forward. So there's a lot of cheerleaders on this call today, and I really appreciate it. Gerardo, anything else you want to say?
No, I am just the amount of like positive feedback, or like people, we have to be there for each other and raise each other up, especially in these spaces that aren't created for us, and having to learn a new language on top of being in these spaces is definitely one where we are needed, and your perspective in order for us to change is important. So really want to thank all of you for joining us.
Gerardo, can you put that slide up for folks if they want to connect with us? Here's our contact, our email, and our Instagram if you want to connect with us. Again, we're excited to present with you, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all.
And I believe.
Thanks for good.
Thank you, Erika.
Thank you, Gerardo.
Appreciate it. And we could connect offline. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tequeria. Have a great day, everyone.